No fragrance, but these are giant dahlias. They're fabulous plants. They grow up from the ground every year. You cut them all the way down. But that's not why we're here. We're here to talk about pruning, some of the do's and don'ts, and a technique that I like to call Papa Bear, Mama Bear, Baby Bear. You might remember that from Goldilocks. We'll get onto that in a second. If there were a perfect plant or I were a genetic engineer, I would design a plant that grows exactly to the height that I want it to end at. It would grow no wider than the space that I have for it. Of course, it would flower in whatever color I felt like that day, smell wonderful, and on a good day, it might even drive down to the store and pick up some Ben & Jerry's for me. But that's not gonna happen. We work with the plants we've got. We always try to pull off a right plant, right place. The idea that I want a plant that meets all the criteria, the amount of sun, the amount of shade, etc. So I'm standing next to a form of sage, and it's gonna be a real good vehicle for explaining what we're gonna do. So let me give you a couple of tips here. Papa Bear, Mama Bear, Baby Bear. The longest branches or the longest stuff that we want to get rid of on the plant are the Papa Bears. The Mama Bears are at just the height that we want, and the Baby Bear are the little ones. So it's like too little, just right, and too much. The purpose of pruning is to try to, or this technique of pruning is to try to cut back to a spot deeper inside the plant than where you want it to end up. We're going deep inside the profile of the plant, finding a bud that has good potential. It's got flowers, it looks like it's going to grow, and cutting deeper down into the plant in order to start it over. So it's like, okay, you're done, you're starting over. Someday you'll be about midway here and perfect. And I'll always be regenerating new growth from the inside. And that's really a key point to keep a plant going forever. So let's imagine, because I don't have the perfect plant here right now, that this branch is even longer, that it's way out of the outline of this, like your bangs have gotten too long. So I want the plant to end up in about this profile. So I'm going to look for a candidate bud to cut back to. And some of these, because I'm going to do this in a few places on the plant every time I go through this cycle, some of these I may only cut back part way, and now they're starting closer to their mature height. Some of them I'm going to cut all the way back. These are the Baby Bears, and I'm going to cut back to here knowing that it's going to continue growing. It'll get to where I like it, and then someday it'll go a little beyond that. And then the next time I come back, I'm going to look for something else in this range and cut back to it again. So in fact, I'm not responsible for this, but obviously somebody at Alice Keck Park Memorial Garden knows what they're doing. This looks like a cut from maybe a year ago. There was a bud here. This bud grew out probably a year later, and then two new buds came out from that. So you can see how this plant is always wanting to replace itself and throw off new growth. So now I'm going to cut back here. I'm going to cut at a slight angle. That keeps water from building up here and starting rot. And on this next branch, maybe I'll cut here. So now I've got a tiny baby. And this neighboring branch, because this one's already pretty low, I'm going to cut here. Now I've got a slightly older sibling starting out. And somewhere else in the plant, I might cut back even deeper and start it over. So this is a type of pruning you do sporadically, and you'd like every few months maybe during the growing season, or maybe just once a year. But the idea is that you only cut back percentages of the plant at a time. Maybe a third of the plant or a quarter of the plant will get this type of pruning. So there's always the older ones, then there's some new stuff starting, but it's not the whole plant done at once. I'll walk around my garden with a set of pruners and just kind of see a few long ones, go deep inside, cut them off. I might be pruning 10% of the growth at any given session. So this is the mainstay of my arsenal. Felco, Corona are some of the top brands. Avoid the really cheap ones because they go out of alignment, the blades don't stay sharp, and they're not adjustable. I finally figured out after about 20 years the right way to adjust these things, and it keeps them great. The other thing is I always have a little sharpening stone just to clean them up a little bit and make sure I've got a good sharp blade. cutting a sharp cut as opposed to breaking a branch or whatever is always superior, more likely to heal and create problems. So these are good depending on your hand strength. You can go through some pretty decent sized branches on perennials and some shrubs and things like that. If the going gets rough, you've got loppers, a lot more leverage. Same idea in terms of keeping them sharp. Keep your fingers and nose out of them. But these are for bigger branches, and they're small enough you can get inside a plant and work with them. You always want to cut fairly close to the growth point. For little things, because I do this same technique for my house plants, even a plant like coleus or something like that, you might want little snippers like this, and these are my pride and joy. I've had these since 1970 something. These are my bonsai shears. I got my start in horticulture training trees for my own hobby. And when it really gets big, you might need a saw for some big cuts, but not so much for this technique. If you need anything bigger than this, please call a certified arborist. So let me stress that this is not a universal pruning technique for every plant, and we don't have time in this segment, and I probably don't know every plant that would respond to this, but after a while you get a little instinct. What we just looked at is a rather soft tissue, kind of what's called an herbaceous plant. It's not real woody. This is a woody plant. This is cotoneaster, related to holly and those sorts of things, but the same basic principle applies here. We've got these overly long branches that need to be pruned back, and I could just say, well, I don't want you any bigger than this, and cut right here. If I do that, the next bud is going to start exactly where I cut it, and it's going to be out of line fairly quickly. So this is a case where I'll go deeper inside the plant, find some twigs or things that are obviously raring to grow again, and cut back to those. So here's a little nuance in terms of pruning. We want to cut back so that the last bud or the last new growth point is already aiming in the direction we want the plant to go. The character of this plant, cotoneaster, is kind of up and arching. So if I prune to an upward facing branch or an upward facing twig, that's great, because this is now going to grow out and this way. If instead I prune to a side or a bottom bud, this new branch is going to come right out, and it's not the character I'm looking for in this plant. So I could either cut here, and here's my new growth tip coming out this way, or if I want to leave a little more, I can cut to here. Here's my new arch starting, and then cut again here because I have an upward facing twig. If I cut here, this down one's just going to fall or grow downward. So that's a good cut. It's going to take a little while, but this is going to grow up and out and create kind of a natural arc, which is the character of this plant. So always prune so that the last bit of growth is aiming where you want the plant to go. Pretty simple. So that's it on pruning. It's not a technique that works with everything, but I hope you found something in here that you can use in your own garden. I just found that I needed a new pair of gloves. These have kind of had it, so I'm off to the nursery, and see you next time.